Hello, you beautiful lot. I am back from my break, which I think was the longest in the 2.5 year history of me doing this podcast. Where have I been? I've been in Indonesia. Not entirely on holiday, I've been working, but on my other job rather than this one, so it was a bit of a mix of work and play the past few weeks. I appreciate your patience, and thank you for sticking with me through the break. Hopefully, it's given you newbies a chance to go back and look over some old content that you might not have seen before. Hopefully that content is not a complete pile of shit. Okay, that's the housekeeping done. Let's get into the episode. I'm not doing seasons, so I think this one is episode 118. The air in Bali doesn't just touch you, it swallows you, wraps around your skin like wet silk that's been steeped in the memory of the last 1,000 years. The temples sweat, just like you do. Stone walls black with moss, carvings of gods whose eyes have been staring longer than history remembers. Somewhere deep inside the maze of Ubud, you sit cross-legged on a meditation cushion that's been used so many times it's forgotten its original shape. Incense coils in the air, slow and deliberate, like a snake tasting the atmosphere for sins. The ceiling fan groans overhead, pretending to help. Outside, a rooster screams into the late morning heat, announcing nothing in particular. In front of you is a monk, his robe the color of dried blood. His voice is calm but heavy. Everything is impermanent, he says. 3 words, as if they were obvious. 3 words that land in your chest like a stone breaking the surface of a lake. He's not trying to convince you. He's telling you a fact. Gravity, rainfall, death. You want to believe him, you really do, but your brain is busy holding on to things it's not supposed to. A conversation you shouldn't have had, a message you haven't answered. A future you can't see clearly but still try to control like it's a thermostat you can adjust. Cut to a week later. You're back home sitting in a therapist's office. Same truth, different clothes. This time it's fluorescent lights instead of sunlight through temple gates. This time the voice is saying, your feelings won't last forever. No incense, no moss-covered gods, just a tissue box, a clock that's always too loud, and the sound of your own breathing. You realize then Buddhism and psychology are speaking the same language, they just have different accents. One wraps the truth in parables, rituals, and centuries-old wisdom. The other files it under case studies, clinical notes, and treatment plans. Both are trying to get you to the same place. A space in your head that isn't owned by fear or craving. That's what this episode is about. How the soft words of a monk and the sharp questions of a therapist can be pointing toward the same doorway. How ancient Dharma and modern psychology, no matter how far apart they seem, are really just 2 lenses for looking at the same thing, the fragile, ever-changing mind. There's something obscene about how the 4 noble truths start. No sugar, no warm-up, no let's start with the positives. They don't even shake your hand before they break the news. First truth. Life is suffering. It's like meeting someone for the first time and instead of small talk, they open with, you know you're dying, right? It's not meant to depress you. It's meant to remove the anesthetic, to rip out the IV drip you've been feeding yourself since birth, the one labeled, maybe it will all work out if I just. Buddha didn't mean suffering only as broken bones, funeral processions, and unpayable debts. He meant dukkha, that constant subtle dissatisfaction, the itch that can't be scratched because the itch isn't on your skin, it's in your existence. You get the job and it's still not enough. You fall in love and you're still afraid they'll leave. You meditate and you're still annoyed that the thoughts won't shut up. That's dukkha. Psychology starts in the same place, though it uses friendlier words. In therapy, this is the intake session, the part where you're asked, so what brings you in today? The clinician wants to hear your pain points, your wounds, your unshakable fears. And there's always this moment where you try to dress it up. I've been feeling off lately, or I'm just under a lot of stress. But the truth, when it finally spills out, is messier, lonelier. It's the realization that something is wrong and it's not going away on its own. That's the first truth in psychological drag, the acknowledgement of suffering as a constant background noise, the honesty that you can't fix what you won't name. Second truth, the origin of suffering is craving. Here's where Buddhism does something that feels almost mean. It doesn't just say you're suffering, it says you're the one causing it. Not you personally, but the way you keep grasping, clinging, chasing the mirage. In Pali, it's tanha, thirst, a wanting so deep it burns your throat. You crave what you don't have and you cling to what you're terrified to lose. In therapy, this is the diagnosis. The clinician peels back the bandage and says, you see this pattern? This isn't random. It's attachment theory, cognitive distortions, the way your nervous system was wired in childhood to believe safety only exists when certain conditions are met. You overwork because you're craving security. You check your phone 50 times an hour because you're craving connection. You replay arguments in your head because you're craving control over how you are perceived. Cognitive behavioral therapy has a neat way of framing this. Suffering isn't caused by the event, but by the thoughts you attach to it. Buddhism would nod and say, exactly, your suffering isn't from the world, it's from the story you tell yourself about the world. And yet, knowing this doesn't automatically save you. If anything, it makes the whole thing more insidious, because now you see the craving and you see yourself feeding it. You watch yourself buy another self-help book, start another doomed relationship, open another dating app, all while knowing exactly what you're doing. Third truth, the cessation of suffering is possible. This is the moment of hope, the commercial break after the bad news. In Buddhist thought, if suffering is caused by craving, then cutting off craving ends suffering. Not like flipping a light switch, but like slowly letting a fire die out because you've stopped throwing logs on it. In therapy, this is the reframing moment. The part where you hear, it's not hopeless, you can learn to see this differently. Acceptance and commitment therapy will teach you that your thoughts aren't orders, they're just background chatter. Dialectical behavior therapy will hand you tools for regulating your emotions instead of being swept away by them. Even traditional psychoanalysis, for all its Freudian tangents, holds to the belief that insight can lead to change. And here's the overlap. Both systems reject the idea that you're powerless. Suffering isn't a prison you're locked in for life. It's a set of conditions, and if you change the conditions, the suffering dissolves. Not perfectly, and not forever, but enough to give you space to breathe. The danger here, and both Buddhism and psychology warn about this, is chasing cessation as another craving. Wanting peace so badly that the wanting itself becomes another form of suffering. In meditation, you learn to notice even the desire for enlightenment as another itch you can't scratch. In therapy, you learn that wanting to fix yourself too desperately just reinforces the belief that you're broken. Fourth and final truth. Well, not the final truth, but of this list. The path to the cessation of suffering is the Eightfold Path. This is where Buddhism gets practical. The first three truths are like the diagnosis and prognosis. This one is the prescription. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Not right as in morally superior, but right as in effective. The steps you take that reduce suffering instead of feeding it. In psychology, this is the treatment plan. It's your therapist saying, here's what we're going to work on. It's behavior activation for depression, scheduling activities that reconnect you to meaning. It's exposure therapy for anxiety, systematically facing what scares you so your nervous system stops treating it as a threat. It's setting boundaries, learning communication skills, restructuring thought patterns. Both frameworks understand that awareness alone doesn't change much. You can know the stove is hot and still keep touching it. You need structure, discipline, and a practice. And here's where the middle way becomes a bridge. Psychology thrives on incremental, measurable change, while Buddhism thrives on mindful, intentional change. Put them together, and you get a path that is both compassionate and ruthlessly practical. But there's a subtle danger here too, the checklist mentality. In therapy, you can fall into chasing progress like it's an Olympic sport. In Buddhism, you can treat the Eightfold Path like a ladder to climb instead of a way to walk. Both warn against mistaking the map for the territory. When you strip away the robes and the cardigans, the Four Noble Truths and the psychological model of change are eerily similar. First, you acknowledge the problem. Then you identify the cause. Then you recognize that change is possible. Finally, you commit to a path. Not once, not as a one-off, but over and over, until the path isn't something you walk on, it's something you become. And maybe that's the quiet punchline here. The Four Noble Truths aren't about belief, and neither is therapy. They're about experiments. You try not clinging for a moment. You try breathing instead of reacting. You try watching your thoughts instead of obeying them. You test it. You see what happens. You become your own lab. Which brings you back to that cushion in Bali. The monk saying, everything is impermanent, isn't giving you a philosophy to worship. He's handing you a hypothesis. And the therapist back home isn't giving you answers either. They're giving you experiments. Both are inviting you to stop being a defendant in your own life and start being the scientist. You don't need to be a Buddhist to know things fall apart. You just need to have lived long enough to watch your phone battery die right when you need it most, or to watch someone you love walk away without looking back. The monk calls it anicca, impermanence. The therapist calls it the nature of change. Your nervous system calls it panic. The day you first hear anicca, it sounds almost gentle, like a Zen proverb meant to help you breathe through the petty inconveniences of life. But the deeper you sit with it, the sharper it gets. Impermanence isn't just that ice melts or flowers wilt. It's that the person you were 5 years ago, the one with that voice, that haircut, those opinions you swore were unshakable, no longer exists. That version of you is dead, replaced silently by a new version that you also think will last forever, until it doesn't. This truth terrifies most people. The brain is addicted to stability. It's a pattern-making machine, and patterns need consistency. We love the idea of things staying the same because it gives us the illusion of control. We want our relationships to be constant, our personalities to be predictable, our futures to be as certain as the alarm clock ringing tomorrow morning. Impermanence is like finding out the ground you've been walking on is just a giant conveyor belt moving under you. And no matter how hard you try to stand still, you're still being carried somewhere else. Psychology knows this too, though it gives it a softer edge. Neuroscientists talk about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself in response to new experiences. It's supposed to be good news. Your trauma doesn't have to own you forever. Your habits can be changed. Your skills can be learned and unlearned. But the flip side is that nothing in your brain is fixed. Not even the parts you like. The self-confidence you've built can dissolve if you stop reinforcing it. The relationship skills you've worked on can atrophy. Even your memories aren't static. Every time you recall one, your brain rewrites it slightly, smudging the edges until the truth of your past is a moving target. The irony is that impermanence and neuroplasticity are the same truth within different accents. The Buddhist tells you, this too shall pass. The neuroscientist says, synaptic pathways are mutable. Both mean, stop assuming the world or yourself will hold still for you. But here's the problem. Just because change is inevitable doesn't mean we embrace it. We fight it like we're at war with time. In therapy, you see this all the time. A client clings to their old identity like a life raft. I'm just not the kind of person who, or this is just who I am. The brain tells itself this story to create the illusion of a stable self. It feels safer to be miserable in familiar ways than to risk being happy in new ones. Buddhism rips that raft away. It says, you aren't the same person you were yesterday, and you won't be the same person tomorrow, so stop pretending you're a fixed object. Therapy tries to ease you into the same truth. Your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors can change. Your story isn't finished. But make no mistake, both are telling you the same uncomfortable thing. Your comfort zone isn't a fortress, it's a sandcastle. Let's make this concrete. Imagine you've been anxious for as long as you can remember. You've built your whole personality around being the cautious one. Your job, your relationships, even your hobbies are chosen to minimize risk. In your mind, this is just who you are. But in therapy, you start exposure work. Not getting your dick out. You do small, safe things that trigger your anxiety. Speaking up in a meeting, letting a text go unanswered for a day, traveling without an itinerary. Slowly, your nervous system rewires. The synaptic pathways that used to scream danger when you deviated from the plan now stay quiet. You feel more freedom, more space in your life. From a Buddhist perspective, you didn't improve yourself. You just stopped clinging to an identity that was never solid in the first place. You saw that anxious you wasn't a permanent fixture. It was just a pattern of thoughts and reactions, and patterns are impermanent. The challenge is, most of us want impermanence on our own terms. We want bad feelings to pass quickly, but good ones to linger. We want pain to fade, but pleasure to stay sharp forever. In therapy, this looks like someone doing all the work to reduce their depression, but then clinging so hard to their new happiness that they start to fear losing it, which ironically starts the cycle of anxiety all over again. In Buddhist practice, this is called upadana, clinging, and it's seen as the root of suffering. You can't cherry pick impermanence. It's not a buffet. Everything changes. That's the deal. And yet there's a strange freedom in that. Neuroscience shows that the same neuroplasticity that erases the things you cling to also erases the things you fear. The phobia you thought you'd have forever can dissolve. The grief that felt like a second skeleton under your skin can soften. Even deeply ingrained habits like addiction can be rewired given the right conditions and enough time. The Buddhist monk and the brain researcher both agree. The mind is a moving river, not a stone. Here's where the two perspectives diverge in tone. Psychology often frames change as a skill you can learn. You train your brain, you set goals, track progress, adjust strategies. It's practical, almost mechanical. Buddhism frames it as a surrender. You let go of the illusion that anything, including your brain, will stay as it is. One is about steering the ship, the other is about realizing there's no anchor. In real life, you need both. Too much psychology without impermanence and you start believing you can engineer your way out of suffering entirely. Too much impermanence without psychology and you risk slipping into passive resignation, the why bother swamp. Together, they create a middle path, actively shaping change while accepting that you can't control its every detail. And the most disorienting part, impermanence applies to the you that's listening to this right now. By the time this episode ends, your brain will have changed in microscopic ways. The way you think about impermanence, the subtle emotional tone you carry when you hear that word, will be slightly different than it was when we started. You might not notice it, but it's happening right now in your synapses, right now in your sense of self. Think about that the next time you're stuck in a feeling you think will last forever. Heartbreak, boredom, shame. They all feel eternal in the moment. But there has never been a single emotion in your life that hasn't eventually shifted. The question is whether you can trust that shift enough to stop trying to strangle the present into permanence. I think about Bali when I think about impermanence. The temples there look ancient, eternal, but if you look closely, you see the moss creeping, the stones wearing down, the carvings softening. They're still here, yes, but not the same as they were yesterday. The same temple, the same you, different, always. And maybe that's the point. Impermanence isn't here to scare you. It's here to make you pay attention. The monk tells you this so you stop living like you have infinite sunsets left. The neuroscientist tells you this so you stop believing your brain is a concrete wall instead of a garden. And both are, in their own way, daring you to ask, if nothing stays the same, what are you waiting for? The first time you try mindfulness, it's almost disappointing. No fireworks, no sudden enlightenment. Just you sitting there, noticing the breath go in and out, wondering if you're doing it wrong. Your mind keeps wandering, to the text you forgot to answer, the itch on your shoulder, the thought that maybe you should be doing something more productive than this. In a monastery, a teacher will tell you this is exactly the point. Mindfulness isn't about having perfect focus, it's about noticing the distractions without letting them drag you away. It's training the mind to see thoughts the same way you'd see clouds passing overhead. No judgment, no grabbing, no chasing. In neuroscience, the same thing gets called attention control or meta-awareness. Functional MRI scans show how mindfulness practice quiets down the amygdala, the brain's panic button, and strengthens the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making and emotional regulation. Where Buddhism says, see the thought and let it pass, neuroscience says, reduce activation in limbic reactivity and increase top-down modulation. Two languages, same experience. But before we get too cozy with the overlap, let's rewind a little bit. Mindfulness wasn't born in a corporate wellness retreat or a YouTube-guided meditation. It's a discipline with teeth. In its Buddhist roots, mindfulness, or sati, is part of the Eightfold Path, and its purpose isn't just stress relief, it's insight, liberation, a way to see through the illusion of permanence, self, and control. Mindfulness is the flashlight you shine into the cobwebbed attic of your own mind so you can see what's actually in there without flinching. Western psychology met mindfulness at a dinner party in the late 20th century, and it was love at first sight. John Kabat-Zinn took it out of its monastery home, stripped it of its religious clothing, and called it mindfulness-based stress reduction. Suddenly, mindfulness was everywhere: hospitals, schools, and even corporate boardrooms. And for good reason. It worked. Clinical trials showed it reduced symptoms of anxiety, depression, and chronic pain. It helped people manage addiction and PTSD. It improved focus in kids and reduced burnout in adults. But here's the twist. In translation, something shifted. In Buddhist practice, mindfulness is about seeing clearly so you can let go of craving and aversion. In the corporate world, mindfulness became a tool to improve performance. The intention flipped, from liberation from the system to functioning better inside it. It went from dismantling the machine to greasing its gears. Now imagine a monk meditating under a Bodhi tree. Imagine that same monk in a WeWork office leading a lunchtime mindfulness session so employees can be more resilient in meeting quarterly sales targets. Same breathing, same awareness, completely different aim. Therapists have to navigate this tension all the time. On one hand, mindfulness works as a treatment. In dialectical behavior therapy, it's one of the core skills, helping clients pause before reacting to emotional triggers. In acceptance and commitment therapy, mindfulness lets clients notice their thoughts without getting hooked by them. The scientific results are solid. Brain scans after 8 weeks of mindfulness training show changes in the density of grey matter in areas linked to learning, memory, and emotional regulation. On the other hand, when mindfulness is stripped of its ethical and philosophical backbone, it can feel like it's missing something. In Buddhist teaching, mindfulness is inseparable from compassion, right intention, and wisdom. You're not just calming your mind for your own benefit, you're cultivating a clarity that changes how you relate to everyone and everything. Without that frame, mindfulness risks becoming just another self-improvement hack, a way to tolerate toxic conditions instead of questioning them. There's a metaphor I like for this. In Buddhism, mindfulness is a lantern. You hold it up to see the path clearly, to avoid stepping on snakes or falling into pits. In the corporate wellness version, mindfulness is a flashlight duct taped to your forehead while you keep digging the same hole, just a little more efficiently. That's not to say the modern applications are bad, far from it. The science is remarkable. Studies show mindfulness reduces rumination, the endless mental chewing on past mistakes or future fears. It helps regulate the default mode network, the brain system that lights up when your mind wanders, which is linked to self-referential thinking and, in many cases, unhappiness. For people living with trauma, mindfulness can create enough space between a trigger and a reaction for the nervous system to downshift out of survival mode, and that's life-changing. But the Buddhists will remind you, space is just the beginning. Once you create that gap between stimulus and response, what do you see? That's the real point of mindfulness. You notice how often your thoughts are recycled scripts. You notice the impermanence of emotions, how they rise and fall like waves. You notice the absence of a fixed self in the middle of it all, just a constantly shifting process of sensations, perceptions, and reactions. And that noticing isn't always comfortable. In fact, it can be deeply unsettling. When the noise dies down, what's left is often a raw confrontation with reality. You aren't who you thought you were, and you can't keep what you thought you could keep. This is why in Buddhist training, mindfulness isn't sugar-coated as relaxing. Sometimes it feels like turning on a bright light in a messy room. The mess was always there, but now you can't pretend you don't see it. In therapy, this discomfort is part of the healing process. A client might notice how much of their day is spent avoiding certain feelings, or they might see how quickly they judge themselves. The therapist helps them stay present with that discomfort instead of retreating into distraction. Over time, the brain learns a new pattern, awareness without avoidance. That's neuroplasticity in action. One of the most fascinating things neuroscience has shown about mindfulness is that the changes aren't just temporary states. They can become traits. Long-term meditators show differences in brain structure and connectivity that persist even when they're not meditating. It's like training a muscle until it stays toned even when you're not working out. From a Buddhist perspective, that's exactly the point. Mindfulness isn't something you do, it's something you become. But here's the paradox. The more mindfulness becomes second nature, the less it's about you. The ego loves to turn everything into a personal achievement. I've meditated for 100 days in a row. Buddhism laughs at this. The moment you make mindfulness another badge for your identity, you have missed the point. The goal isn't to become a mindful person. The goal is to realize there's no fixed person there to own the title. So where does that leave us? Maybe somewhere in the middle. Mindfulness as taught in therapy can absolutely change lives, even if it's just used to reduce stress or manage symptoms. But if you stop there, you are only skimming the surface. The deeper water is in using mindfulness to actually change your relationship with reality, to see impermanence, to let go of clinging, to live with the humility that comes from knowing you are not as solid as you think you are. That is the real magic. Mindfulness isn't a place or a posture. It's not a temple, it's not a therapist's office. It is portable. It follows you into arguments, traffic jams, awkward silences. It's the awareness that no matter what's happening, you have the option to witness it rather than drown in it. And maybe that's the meeting point between the monk's world and the MRI machine. The ancient discipline gives you the why, the modern neuroscience gives you the how. And together, they leave you with no excuse not to start paying attention. Because once you do, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, the whole game changes. At some point in Buddhist practice, after you've sat still long enough to notice the flicker of your own thoughts, after you've seen impermanence not as an abstract idea but as the texture of reality itself, you are given a truth that feels less like wisdom and more like a crime scene. Anatta. No self. Not you're more than your body, not you're connected to everything, just the bare, unsettling possibility that the you've been narrating in your head since childhood doesn't actually exist. If impermanence pulls the rug out from under your sense of stability, anatta yanks out the floorboards and shows you there's nothing beneath them either. Buddhism says, what you call you is just a collection of processes, sensations, perceptions, thoughts, emotions, all arising and dissolving like foam on a wave. You can't find the captain of the ship because there is no captain. There's only the ship moving. Psychology doesn't always go this far, but it circles the same drain. Take acceptance and commitment therapy. One of its core principles is self as context. The idea that you're not the thoughts you think, you're the space in which they occur. You're the container, not the contents. Internal family systems talks about the self as a cluster of parts, each with its own voice, its own agenda, often at odds with each other. From this angle, there's no single unified self, just a shifting parliament of impulses and beliefs. Even neuroscience chips away at this illusion. There's no single spot in the brain where the self lives. The sense of identity comes from multiple brain networks interacting. the default mode network for autobiographical memory, the salience network for filtering information, the executive control network for decision making. Damage one part and your sense of self changes, stimulate another, and you might feel detached from your own body. The you feel so certain about is, biologically speaking, a fragile construct stitched together by electrical signals. The trouble is, this is not how we experience life. We feel like there's a central narrator inside our skull. We feel like there's a solid me steering the ship, making choices, holding the pen. And we're attached to this feeling because it gives our lives coherence. Without it, things get slippery. If there's no fixed self, then who's falling in love? Who's suffering? Who's listening to this right now? And who the fuck am I speaking it? Buddhism's answer is as elegant as it is frustrating, Kelsa Priest. The question is flawed. You're asking who as if there's a single point to pin down, when the truth is more like a dance. The self is a verb, not a noun. You don't have a self. You do a self. And because you do it differently, moment to moment, there's nothing solid to hold on to. Therapy bumps into this in its own way. A client might say, "I'm just an anxious person," as if anxiety is fused into their DNA. But over weeks of work, they start to notice times when they're not anxious. They see how anxiety rises in certain contexts and fades in others. The anxious self turns out to be just one mask, worn in certain situations, taken off in others. In this way, therapy starts dismantling the same illusion. The self isn't fixed, it's situational. There's a catch though, and it's a big one. No self is liberating in theory, but destabilizing in practice. Without a strong enough sense of self, you can't function. Buddhism knows this, which is why anatta is taught alongside ethics and compassion. The point isn't to erase yourself into nihilism. The point is to loosen the grip of the ego so you stop taking its every whim and wound as absolute truth. It's the same balance therapists have to strike. You can't just tell someone with trauma the self is an illusion and expect it to heal them. You need a healthy, coherent sense of self before you can safely start questioning its solidity. Otherwise, you're just ripping away the scaffolding before the building can stand on its own. So, what's the payoff of embracing no self? In Buddhism, it's freedom from the endless self-centered loop of craving and aversion. If there's no fixed me, then there's nothing to defend, nothing to prop up, nothing to keep proving. Your insults don't stick to me because there's no solid me for them to stick to. Your praise doesn't inflate me because there's no solid me to get bigger. Life flows, and I flow with it. In psychology, the benefits show up in softer ways. When you loosen your grip on a rigid identity, you become more flexible. You can adapt to change without breaking. You can fail without turning it into a global verdict on your worth. You can step outside your thoughts and see them as passing events, not binding contracts. This flexibility is one of the strongest predictors of mental health. But let's be honest, nobody wakes up one morning and just believes in no self. You have to see it for yourself. In meditation, this might happen when you try to find the watcher of your thoughts and come up empty. You notice that when you search for the self, all you find are more thoughts, sensations, and emotions, and none of them are permanent enough to be you. In therapy, it might happen when you catch yourself reacting in a way that completely contradicts your self-image, and you realize the you you've been defending is more like a rough draft than a finished novel. There's a moment, and it's not always pleasant, when the cracks start to show. You catch the narrator in your head embellishing, editing, outright lying. You notice how every story you tell about yourself is selective, and you wonder, if the story keeps changing, what's the truth underneath? Buddhism's answer, there isn't one, there's just the telling. Neuroscience even has a term for this, the narrative self versus the experiential self. The narrative self is the story, I'm the kind of person who. The experiential self is the raw data, sensations, sights, sounds, emotions, right now. Mindfulness trains you to shift from the narrative to the experiential, to live more in what's actually happening than in the story about what's happening. The more you live there, the less the ego dominates. And maybe that's the key connection between no self and psychology. Both are, at their best, invitations to step out of the story. Buddhism says the story isn't the truth. Psychology says the story isn't fixed. Either way, you get to stop being trapped inside a role you didn't consciously choose. Maybe the answer to all of this isn't a new definition, but the quiet falling away of the need for one. When there's no solid self to defend, life becomes lighter. Not easier. Impermanence still stings and pain still hurts, but lighter in the sense that you stop dragging the weight of me into every moment. Therapy might not use the word no self, but the best therapists know this shift when they see it. It's in the client who stops saying, I am depressed, and starts saying, I notice depression. It's in the survivor who stops identifying entirely with their trauma and starts seeing it as one chapter in a bigger, unwritten book. It's in the person who can sit with discomfort without making it a referendum on who they are. And that's when the Buddhist and the psychologist shake hands across the divide. One says the self is empty, the other says the self is flexible. Both are pointing to the same liberation. The moment you realize the I you've been protecting isn't the only way to be alive. Some people think compassion is a soft word, like it belongs on a pastel mug in a yoga studio gift shop. Something warm and fuzzy you keep for your friends and family, maybe your pets, but never for the driver who cut you off this morning or the stranger who made you feel small. Buddhism doesn't see it that way. Compassion, or karuna, is a discipline. It's as much a practice as meditation or mindfulness, and it's anything but soft. It's closer to a mental resistance workout, forcing you to hold open the door of your heart when every instinct says to slam it shut. In its purest form, compassion is the willingness to meet suffering, yours or someone else's, with the intent to alleviate it. Not to turn away, not to judge, just to meet it. And in Buddhist teaching, it's not optional. It's one of the cornerstones of the path, because without compassion, insight curdles into detachment. You might see through the illusion of self, but if you don't care about the selves of others, your enlightenment is just another ego project in disguise. Psychology has come around to this idea too, though it talks about it in the language of neuroscience and therapy protocols. Compassion isn't just a moral choice, it's a brain state, and like any brain state, it can be trained. Research on compassion meditation, also called loving-kindness meditation, shows that regular practice can actually change neural activity and structure. Areas of the brain associated with empathy, emotional regulation, and positive affect grow stronger. The amygdala becomes less reactive, and stress hormones drop. This is what I mean by compassion as mental rewiring. You're not just becoming a nicer person, you're physically reshaping the pathways your brain uses to respond to other people's pain. You're shifting from a reflexive self-protection mode, the default me-first circuitry, to a broader, more inclusive mode that sees another suffering as part of the same system you inhabit. Buddhist compassion practices start with the self, which sounds counterintuitive, but think about this. If your inner voice is a drill sergeant with a bullhorn, you're not going to be much good at meeting someone else's suffering with gentleness. You'll project your own harshness onto them. So you start with metta, loving kindness, by offering well wishes to yourself. Not affirmations you don't believe, but simple phrases. May I be safe, may I be healthy, may I live with ease. You repeat them slowly, and you mean them, even if at first it feels really fucking awkward. Then you widen the circle to someone you love, to someone neutral, to someone you struggle with, eventually to all beings everywhere. Each step forces your brain to bridge a gap, from self to other, from familiar to unfamiliar, from easy to hard. That bridging is the rewiring. Therapy has its own ways of doing this. Compassion-focused therapy is designed for people whose inner critic is so brutal that self-acceptance feels impossible. It uses guided imagery, mindfulness, and behavioral exercises to help clients build a compassionate self, an inner stance that can meet pain without shame or avoidance. The results are striking: lower depression, reduced anxiety, and improved emotional resilience. What's fascinating is how the Buddhist and psychological approaches converge. Both see compassion as a trainable skill, not just an inborn trait. Both recognize that without it, the mind tends towards isolation, defensiveness, and judgment. And both understand that compassion isn't weakness. It's the opposite. It takes strength to stay open in the presence of suffering, especially when your survival instincts are screaming at you to turn away. There's also the feedback loop. Compassion changes the brain, and a changed brain makes compassion easier. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes, until your first reaction to someone else's pain isn't irritation, pity, or avoidance. It's a kind of quiet recognition. I've been there too. And here's where no self folds into compassion. If you've really seen through the illusion of a fixed self, the boundary between my suffering and your suffering gets blurry. The categories start to dissolve. Helping you is in some sense helping me, because me and you aren't as separate as we pretend. This isn't a mystical claim, it's observable. Emotions are contagious. Nervous systems co-regulate. Your stress affects mine, my calm affects yours. We're built to resonate with each other whether we admit it or not. Neuroscience has a term for this, the mirror neuron system. When we see someone else experiencing an emotion, our brain activates as if we were experiencing it ourselves. This is empathy at the hardware level. Compassion takes it one step further, not just feeling with, but responding to that shared state with care. It's empathy plus agency. But compassion isn't all incense, smoke, and smiles. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's holding someone's hand while they tell you a truth you don't want to hear. Sometimes it's setting boundaries so you can show up without burning out. Buddhism is clear on this. Compassion without wisdom leads to emotional exhaustion. Wisdom without compassion leads to cold detachment. You need both, or you tip into extremes. Therapy works with this balance too. Therapists are trained to be compassionate without collapsing into the client's emotional storm. They call it holding space. You're present, you're attuned, but you're not swallowed. That balance, steady but open, is exactly what compassion practice is designed to cultivate. There's also the myth that compassion is something you either have or you don't, but the research shows it's plastic. You can start from almost zero and through practice grow your capacity. Monks who have meditated on compassion for tens of thousands of hours show brain activity patterns completely different from the average person's. Higher baseline positivity, faster recovery from negative emotions, greater attunement to others. That's not supernatural, that's training. And maybe the biggest mental shift compassion creates is this. It reorients you from self-absorption to connection. Suffering is isolating. Pain makes the world contract around me. Compassion pries it back open. It says, yes, this fucking hurts, but it's not just yours. We all carry versions of it. And that recognition turns the volume down on the ego's endless monologue about how uniquely hard your life is. This is the thing mindfulness alone can't do. Mindfulness makes you aware of suffering. Compassion tells you what to do when you see it. And the doing isn't always grand. Sometimes it's just staying present when every muscle wants to run. Sometimes it's offering a kind word when your pride wants to stay silent. Sometimes it's turning that same willingness inward, speaking to yourself like you would to someone you love. Psychology would call that self-compassion, and it's one of the strongest predictors of resilience. People who can meet their own pain with kindness rather than criticism recover faster from setbacks, have healthier relationships, and are less prone to depression. Buddhism would nod at this and add, when you train compassion for yourself, you're training it for others too. The pathways are the same. And maybe that's the real rewiring, not just in the brain, but in the way you orient to the world. Compassion shifts you from me versus you to me with you. From this is my problem to this is our shared human condition. It doesn't erase suffering, but it changes the environment in which suffering happens. And that change, inner and outer, is what both the monk and the therapist are aiming for, even if they never use the same words. Bali fades in the rear view like a dream you can almost remember. The smell of incense clinging to your clothes, the hum of scooters, the heat pressing onto your skin. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the monk's voice telling you, everything is impermanent. You came home with that sentence tucked into your carry-on like contraband. You heard it again in a different accent, a therapist's. Your feelings won't last forever. Same truth, two voices. The saffron robe and the cardigan pointing toward the same open door. Over this episode, we've walked through that doorway in 5 steps. The 4 noble truths as a blueprint for therapy, impermanence braided with neuroplasticity, mindfulness as both an ancient discipline and a clinical intervention, the unsettling vertigo of no self, and compassion, not as sentiment, but as a rewiring of the brain toward connection. And maybe you've noticed, none of these truths care whether you believe them or not. They're not faith statements, they're observations. You breathe in, you breathe out. You suffer, you let go. You change, the world changes. You look for the you inside all this and come up empty, but somehow, instead of loss, it feels like space. Buddhism hands you these truths in rituals, chants, and parables, but psychology hands them to you in treatment plans, progress notes, and scan results. Both are trying to get you to stop gripping the barbed wire of your own mind so tightly. Both are experiments in loosening the knots you've mistaken for yourself. The point isn't to become a better Buddhist or a better patient. The point is to become intimate with the machinery of your own mind, to see the patterns not as enemies but as moving parts, to recognize that the person listening to this right now will not be the same person when this episode ends, and that isn't a threat, it's an invitation. So whether you find yourself on a meditation cushion or in a therapist chair, remember, you are in the same lab, the same experiment, one that's been running for thousands of years. The goal isn't to freeze yourself into the perfect version. The goal is to keep watching, keep loosening, and keep meeting whatever arises with the same steady curiosity. Because everything changes, and in that change, everything is possible. Thank you, you beautiful lot, for joining me on this exploration of Buddhism versus psychology today. I hope there's been some points in there to get you thinking, and that it's piqued your curiosity a little. As always, if there's anything off the back of this episode that you want to talk about, you can see I'm getting towards the end because I lose the ability to speak, then I'd love to hear from you. You can find us on X, Instagram, and TikTok with the handle @TheObservingEye. And we're also on YouTube, which you may have seen us on, at youtube.com/@TheObservingEye as well. And you can also find us on all the various podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, all of that lot. I also have an email address, which so far, no one has sent me dick pics, and I want that to remain the case. If you want to wax philosophical with me, or you want to recommend ideas for future episodes, you can email me on david@theobservingeye.com, and I will try to get back to you as soon as I can, which is generally within a day or so, because I don't get bombarded by them. That's it for this week. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll catch you soon.